Hey folks, Jeff Berman here. I got the chance to talk to my very old and very dear friends, Kass and Mike Lazerow, on stage at South by Southwest earlier this month, and we wanted to share that conversation with you. Kass and Mike are two of the very smartest, very best entrepreneurs, investors, and humans I know, and I've had the pleasure of watching them working with them for a very long time now. I was on their board at Buddy Media, the SaaS company that they built from scratch, from the ground up, and eventually sold to Salesforce for nearly $1 billion. And now Kass is on the board of Wait What?, the company that makes this podcast. So we're keeping this all very much in the family this week. Kass and Mike are unabashedly honest about how hard it is to build successful companies, especially when your co-founder is also your spouse.
This is Masters of Scale.
The Lazerows have distilled their most valuable lessons into a new book, which is coming out this spring. It's called Shoveling Shit. Yes, Shoveling Shit. A love story about the entrepreneur's messy path to success. We talked about this love story live on stage in Austin, Texas, as part of South by Southwest. And I started by asking Kass about the messiest parts of their careers. Their toughest business moment was back just before the dot-com bubble burst. Mike and Kass were newlyweds, and they were co-founders of the site and the business golf.com.
We had sold golf.com to ChipShot, and ChipShot worked in Silicon Valley, and they made custom golf clubs in the most expensive part of the world. We were bought in December 23rd, 1999, and we were psyched. This company was going public in the spring. We were like, our board had all voted for it. We were like, oh my God, this is the heyday of everything that you wanted for the internet. Like, this was, eToys was going public for like billions of dollars. And in March, I think it was March 3rd, 2000, we got a call that said, hey, I just wanted to let you know this is from the president of ChipShot.
So the deal hadn't formally closed yet. You'd signed an agreement to sell the company to ChipShot.
It was
in
closed.
advance of them going public.
It was closed.
It was fully closed.
Fully closed. We no longer had control of our bank accounts, okay? Every bit of money was coming from ChipShot. March 3rd, 2000, I pick up the phone. It's the president of ChipShot saying, I'm very sorry. I have bad news. We're going out of business. And I said, what the f are we doing here? And
we can, it's Texas. We can curse.
Okay. Yeah. So I said, what the fuck are you talking about? And basically he said that Sequoia, who had backed them to go public, had pulled out, and there was no more filing, and they were going bankrupt, and they'd be out of business in 2 weeks, and they had no more money to pay anything for us. Nothing for payroll, nothing, zero.
And this was not a deal where you had taken a whole bunch of cash off the table.
No.
They had this was a
This
stock
all
deal.
Stock deal. We were psyched. We thought we had hit it.
And your team members were going to do well as well.
Big time.
Right?
And we own more than 50% of the company.
So set the stage for us. You're now in March. This call comes in. Where are you when the call comes in?
So we actually lived above our office. And when we got too big, we started bringing people up into our living room. And we were in what was the bedroom. So the three founders, Mike, myself, and Mike Casper, were in the back. And just for the record, there was only one bathroom. So anytime someone had to go to the bathroom, they had to walk past us, which is incredibly embarrassing.
It was the poop deck.
Yes.
The poop
basically
deck.
The poop deck.
Yeah.
And
there's going to be a scatological theme to all of this. Yeah.
And so we were sitting there in the bedroom part of this office, and I put it on speaker, and then Mike and Casper came by, and they're like, we just started firing questions. And I actually think there was an employee in the bathroom at the time that came out and was like, is everything okay?
And the answer is no.
No. Immediately.
Yeah. So you're in the bedroom, you're taking this call. It is a deluge of bad news.
Yes.
The shit is hitting the fan. You must have been personally devastated.
Yes. I think the first thing that came to my mind was all the employees, right? I didn't even go to all the investors, and we had a lot of friends and family as investors, but I immediately went to, oh my God, how am I going to pay these people? This is their livelihood. What's going to happen?
So what happens next? You hang up this call. Are you calling lawyers? Are you trying to figure out how to back out of the, like, what do you do?
Well, the first thing is I had to calm down. I was angry. So I felt an immense amount of responsibility to everybody there. I felt like I was duped, right? So of course I'm the operator, so I'm a COO, so I'm going backwards. I'm like, okay, what did I miss in due diligence? What did they say to me? I'm looking through notes. I keep looking and Mike's like, okay. And then I was like, what are we gonna do? And he literally turned to me and he's like, we're gonna start this again. We're gonna just start it again. We're gonna do this.
And so, Mike, where did that come from? I mean, I think most people would be spinning.
Yeah, so it came from just this idea we've always had, which we didn't know at the time, which was you just keep going as an entrepreneur. So as an entrepreneur, you show up to work and shit hits the fan. This particular day, it rained shit, right? It was like, whoa. And what we have to realize is 1999, the frenzy around the internet was like Taylor Swift meets AI. Like globally, everyone's talking about the internet. eToys is doing like 100 million of sales, but it's worth like $50 billion. And, you know, everything's going up and to the right. And we sold to a Sequoia-backed company, and we were in our heads very rich. You know, we owned half of this company.
And on paper.
On paper.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden it's like, oh,
too.
we have like no money now, which was fine. So we didn't really have money at the time. And I remember sitting down, what do we need to do? And the first thing we need to do is raise money. And so we hit the road with our partner, went to San Francisco, the Bay Area, which was very expensive hotels. So we stayed at a motel that had, you know, the thick glass, like bulletproof at the...
But there were three of us in one room.
And we shared a room with our co-founder, which is like a little awkward. You know, because we had just gotten married. We got married October 23rd, 1999. We did what no one probably should do, which is start a company while you're dating. But to us, I was 25. I'm like, you know, she's really smart. She's hot. She's like, loves the internet. I'm all in. And...
objectively, you hit the lottery. Mike.
Yeah, and I'm like cross eyes, like bad heart. I'm like, okay. I was like, are you alive and like me? That's all I needed. We got lucky. Like a lot of this is luck. And we met a guy named Keith Bank in Chicago. And we raised, I think, 1.2 million or 1.5 million.
In one lunch.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was like such a key meeting. And we filled it in with a few others. Our former investors in golf.com, some of which were friends and family, just weren't pleased with us.
I think that's a bit of an understatement.
Correct.
Yeah. What was the worst part of that?
The worst part, I would say, is that, well, first of all, I think telling our individual families that we lost their money. And don't forget that you have startup costs when you start a company, and that comes from yourself, right? Unless you can take a loan or anything. But I think the worst part was that a very close family member sued us and just demanded the money back. And over and over again, I had calls. Then I got lawyers to tell him, like, this is not going to happen. This is not, I mean, I don't have any money to give you. It's not even legal. And then he basically threatened to kill Mike, which was pretty awful.
I'm like, why me?
It was a little odd that he didn't threaten to kill me.
I'm not your family, like direct family.
It was a little bit odd, but at the time, I think I was just deeply embarrassed by that, like thinking to myself, like, how does this happen? It was a good lesson in pick your investors wisely, okay? And make sure that they can afford to lose whatever they're putting in.
So you raised this $1.2 million over lunch with a bunch of golf dudes at a legendary country club, and what happens from there?
We went back. I think the first thing that brought a little bit of joy was that I could hold an all-team meeting and say, we're back in business. So that is like a feeling of just massive relief. So we did that and we put our heads down. And you have to understand, this is now 2000. There is nothing living, right? No companies are living.
The 1.0 bubble has
just gone.
popped.
No one cared about us. There wasn't a lot of business. We had to like limp along. We were mostly dead, right? But barely alive for 7 years until the ad revenue business started coming back.
And you were able to sell the company ultimately.
Yes.
It's also another story of luck, which is there is this, young kid who does not look like most golfers. So there's a black kid who dominates the Masters. And at the time, Tiger Woods, like Tiger was as big of a name as Taylor Swift, right? Like everywhere in the world, Tiger, 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 every company. And we basically rode Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson, that rivalry, to a $25 million sale to Time Warner, which was a company that used to exist. There was a big company, media and cable and all of it. It's now broken up and disintegrated and crashed and burned, a lot of it. But we were the kind of online piece of Golf Magazine and Sports Illustrated, which they owned. And that got us to New York, which then opened up a whole world of New York tech innovation, which we've been in since we moved in 2005, 2006.
So before we get to the next phase of the entrepreneurial journey, I want to go back. There are not a ton of partners who are dating who start a company together, then get married and go forward. Your journey together didn't actually start with dating.
No.
Take me back.
Okay. You had to go there.
We have to go there.
So I basically grew up in his house. So I am a
Do
few
you want to
years.
step out for a few minutes? And then...
I am a few years older than he is. He will love to say it's just a fact, right? That's what you're going to say. And so I was best friends with his older brother, and that was the house to hang out in when we were younger. And I'm talking like high school years.
And we should probably disclose at this point that I was also
Yes.
hanging out in that
So
house.
He is one of my best friends since I was 16. And it's pretty awesome to be sitting up here. I just want to say that. And we would always, so Andrew, his brother, and I would have to bribe Mike to get out of the basement so that we could all hang out. And I would take any dollars that I had from allowance or anything, and we'd pull money to get him out because he was such a pain in the ass.
He was a great entrepreneur from very early on. He had a business being a professional pain in the ass.
Yes. And so that is the background. And I grew up in his house, never dated Andrew. I just want to make sure I'm totally clear on that.
Didn't date Mike's brother.
No, and never even looked at him. I looked at him as a pain in the ass little brother. And then we met up in '96 at our mutual friend's wedding, Kevin Kane and Jill. And we got paired. And by the way, thanks for bailing that night.
I bailed.
You bailed. That Friday night of the rehearsal dinner of Thanksgiving weekend, very tough weekend to have it, I was told everyone was going, and I did what my mother told me. You RSVP, you show up. So I showed up, and it was Andrew, Mike, and me as the only representatives of our friend group. And so Andrew said, you and Mike need to do a toast to represent. I'm like, oh my God, I have to do it with Mike. He talks so much. And he's such a big talker. We all avoided you. You know that, right? All the girls avoided him because...
You've been talking a lot more at this podcast than I have. I'm just like...
And so basically we got up there and we did this toast, and it was magic.
Yeah.
We filled in each other's sentences. Everyone afterwards was like, how long have you been dating? Mike starts making stories. He basically closed the deal that night that we were dating on the spot. Like we'd been dating for 20 years, and that was that. And then that was history.
And here we are now.
Yes.
So okay, so that just sets the stage for where we're going. Mike, you founded your first company in college. What tell us about the start of your formal entrepreneurial journey there?
Yeah, so, I came from a relatively entrepreneurial family, small businesses, small money manager, small developer. Parents were divorced, so I had kind of two dads, very different, but not in like a rich dad, poor dad way, but just very different. And I went to Northwestern to journalism school, and it was pretty obvious, even freshman year in 1992 that the internet was coming. Really 93. It's super early, but if you think about some of the early sites like Craigslist and even the eBay, it was like, oh, classified ads, which kind of support newspapers. And I just went down a rabbit hole with the internet, and I had an idea for a business, which was, instead of running kind of AP news stories in college papers, I was involved with the Daily Northwestern. Let's create our own student wire. And so I built a network of 700 campus papers. They contributed their content. In exchange, they got all the other content. I owned the rights to the content. I could syndicate it, which became very valuable as ESPN and other sites grew, because all of a sudden I had the Michigan Daily's football content, right? Which I could syndicate. And then I had a press release service where if you wanted to reach 700 campus newspaper editors, you could just blast it out. So it was a business that was doing okay. And then I merged it with a marketing company called Student Advantage, which we took public, actually before we did golf.com. And it was a company that went from 0 to 100 million in sales on the back of an AT&T calling card. So they would give away our product, the Student Advantage card. Calling cards don't exist, and which is why the company doesn't exist.
I mean, newspapers don't exist.
Newspapers don't really exist. And I just knew the internet, when I go down a rabbit hole, I don't come out until I find something. And so it happened in Web 1.0, 2.0. It's happening now with AI. And so when I met Kass and she was in the internet business, I was like, done. At the time I started, there were only 13 million people on the internet. I hadn't really met other people who were interested in internet businesses, being in Chicago, not the Bay Area. And that's how it got started.
So, I mean, there are very few people who start one company and exit it and do a second company and have some success. And notwithstanding the chip shot crazy, you did have a successful exit. So that's two. At that point, you're married. You've got, I think, 2 kids with one on the way, right? If I might,
when we start the next company,
yes,
that's right.
Right, and you would be understood for saying, well, I'm going to hang out at Time Inc. for a little while. I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to figure it out. But you didn't. You started yet another company.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it usually happens around the birth of every kid, and he he loves to think, like he said, in rabbit holes. And so May 24th, 2007, Facebook announced that it was opening up its platform and you could develop on it. And so I got pulled out from, just delivering our daughter, our 3rd child. And we're in the recovery room and Mike goes, I've got it.
So let's just be clear.
Yes.
You've just given birth to your 3rd child.
Yes.
It's not
C-section.
It's not 3 weeks later.
No,
you're
it's
sitting
the
on
day,
the couch.
and I am
you're in the recovery room.
And it was I was in a lot of pain, and he goes, "I've got it." And I literally think he is getting me sushi. Like this is going to be. He's going to get me pizza, and he's going to get me sushi, and this is going to be great. And I go, "Okay, where are you going to order from?" And he goes, No. I know what we're going to do next. I said, are you fucking kidding me? And he goes, no, this is it. This is it. You have no idea what's about to happen. I know the next company, and we're doing it.
So, Mike, what happened in that moment? Where did that come from, and what was the thing?
I knew about Facebook, about 200 million people on it. I was kind of fascinated. And Mark Zuckerberg gets on stage, says, we're opening up our platform. We're exposing the social graph. Anyone who wants to can build apps on Facebook. And this is back before Facebook had kind of impacted democracy and mental health and all this stuff. So it was like kind of a good thing for the world, we thought.
It was a simpler time.
It was a simpler time. And I just thought that like everything's better with friends. But when Facebook recreated the social graph, that kind of the real life map of relationships, and you could put that on apps, it fundamentally changed the internet. And we ended up launching a business that became Buddy Media. We didn't know it was going to be a software company. It had to pivot a few times. We would have never called it Buddy Media if we thought it would be a software company.
So you You talked about the company pivoting a few times. What was the initial vision once you got past kind of the space you knew you wanted to go into? Where did it start and where
This
did
is
it get?
pretty ugly, though.
Yeah, so the initial vision was we want to bridge the commercial world, like businesses, advertising, with Facebook. And it took us, I think, 4 business models to get there. We pivot really fast. We love throwing away stuff. And so the first idea was probably the worst idea I've ever come up with in the history of ideas. I remember going into HBO at the time. I said, we can help you on Facebook. We got this thing called Acebucks, and they just like laughed. But they said, can you help us deploy our content on Facebook? And we heard that enough times, so we said, okay, we're going to pivot into software to help the largest brands in the world.
Which I think is a really important moment in the story, because you're out pitching one thing, the market's giving you feedback on the product that the market needs. And so rather than searching for product market fit, you're actually being told by the
Yes.
customers what product market fit looks
And you
like.
have to be ready to listen to that, because half the time with pivots, it's ego, right? That you don't do the pivot. So you have founders who sit there and go, well, wait, I raised money on the first idea. I can't go back to the board and tell them that this isn't working. I can't go back to my family and tell me that this isn't working. So you have to listen. And we were having clear feedback to us.
Around the time that Kass and Mike were getting Buddy Media up and running, I was working at MySpace. And shortly after I left MySpace, I went out to New York in part to see them. And we sat in their makeshift conference room, and they showed me what they had built so far at Buddy Media. And we started riffing on what it could be, where it could go, what the market needed, what the business opportunities were. And before I knew it, they were offering me a seat on their board.
I said, we got to get him on the board, because at that point we were moving so quickly that I think I needed someone that I could bounce ideas off of. And that was another lesson that I learned, that you need to have a working board. You need to have people who actually help you, right? So they have to have a purpose. It's not just like, oh, they gave you money and they get a seat at the board. It's like, no, what are you going to do for that money?
Mike, there's something very powerful about how you communicate with boards and how you manage boards. And this is one example of it. I've learned so much from you about how you do this. Can you talk about your philosophy on that, how you did it at Buddy and how you now advise companies to do it?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue with founders and their relationship with boards is the founders don't have a clear idea of what is going on. Right? They can talk about it, but they really can't think clearly about their plan. And so I would write these epic letters, which would take probably like a day, where I'd outline my thinking. Here's what we said we would do. Here's what we're doing. Here's where we're going. Here's why. And that forced me to put it down in paper. And if it didn't make sense to me, it would never make sense to anyone else. And so board decks are very useless, other than the financials, because it doesn't really tell a story. If you can't sit there and communicate what you're doing, why you're doing, what are the top 3 areas of focus, why those areas of focus are so important, you will never be able to move the board forward, let alone your team. I've always treated the board as partners, not as bosses. I'm no better than them or, worse. It's just we are partners in this. And it has helped. And it's helped me as, now that we have like 100 investments in the tech space, I think it's helped me work with entrepreneurs better, because I really ask them to write it down. Like, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist.
I think Mike's also not telling the other story. So at golf.com, when we started, we had to redo the whole company. That meant new money, right? And a new board. And we had 2 sharks on our board now. We didn't own much of the company. And that was Jeremy Mindage and Matt Sarovich. And they had a hedge fund. And I remember the first board meeting that I gave, right? So whole new company. And he said, how is sales going? I'm like, yeah, sales is going pretty good. I mean, Mike, why don't you talk about it? And Mike says, yeah, it's going like this. And he interrupts. And Matt Sarovich, I'll never forget it, screams at the top of his lungs at me, don't shine the turd. And I remember just kind of like literally like losing the blood in my face, having goosebumps and going, okay. And that was the lesson. And so Mike took that.
So what did you hear when he said, "Don't shine the turd"?
Say what the sales are. They're not good. They're not great. They're not okay. Say the number. Say what's going on. Be truthful. Be transparent. Like have radical transparency. And it doesn't matter if it's your board, your employees. You've got to be transparent. And I think Mike took that lesson because we were like, it was as if we had just been massively reprimanded. And we took that lesson and he did such a good job going forward. And that was it. It was just full transparency going forward.
I think we realized that people in general are okay with bad news, especially these days, right? But even then, they're fine with bad news. People hate surprises. So if they think things are going this way, but they're actually going this way, that just like ruins trust forever.
It's one thing as co-founders to figure out roles. You're also wife and husband here. How do you two divide roles in leading a company?
So I do everything that's operational. So anything that touches legal, accounting, teams, employees, HR, finance. And then I also took on marketing, which is unusual, but it's like a pastime for me. And Mike is always doing vision, sales, strategy, board. Raising money.
I got all the credit, like Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, all these things. Kass does all the work. And she made me look incredibly great. And these companies only work if they're operated incredibly well. It's not the ideas. You have to have like a big market and like differentiated product, all that stuff. But how Kass has run companies our whole life has been the biggest blessing to us business-wise.
Kass, among the things that you do incredibly well in operating a company is the team part.
Yes.
And you talk about putting the cult in culture. How do you do that? How do you do that great? How'd you do that at Buddy Media?
So I think it stems from my childhood. I don't want to be like over dramatizing this, but I did not have the team atmosphere in my childhood that I had wanted. I'm the fourth kid. There were a lot of alliance games. I always felt like I was not getting picked on a team, if that relates to anybody, and ostracized at some points. And that was just such an awful wound that I thought, literally in everything I did. I remember I kind of was in a sorority. When I say kind of, like I didn't participate, but then I decided, okay, if I'm going to participate, I'm going to take a role and I'm try to make the culture better. So the same thing happened at all of the companies I did. I wanted to create an atmosphere where there were no alliances, where there was none of this bullshit cliques. And literally, there were times where I saw like mean girl stuff happening, not just with girls. And I literally brought them in and I said, if I see it again, you're fired on the spot, period. Pencil down. We're not going to have that. We're going to lift everybody up. And then you have to think about the tools, right? What's the glue to connect everybody? Everyone talks about, oh, how it's so hard right now because everyone's remote. It is, but you have to think about how do people bond? They bond in bad times and they bond in good times. So if you're transparent, that's incredible. If you celebrate the small wins together, that's a pretty obvious one. So I wanted to start the glue from the very beginning. So I had scavenger hunts. I made everyone dress up. I had leadership team who did not want to do it. And I basically said, I'll fire you.
There are a few companies in the category that are swirling. Buddy's the market leader. There's one critical hire that happens in this phase, and then there's a process that leads to selling the company and not deciding to go it alone. Take us there, if you would.
So again, remember, just to remind the audience here that I don't like losing. So one of the things that was happening is Mike was getting a lot of interest from California companies, specifically Salesforce was really talking to us about like, what are we doing? They were kind of opening, lifting the hood up and asking. And I thought to myself, what would really make us well known to companies? And I think I even bounced it off of you. What if I stole the #1 salesperson from Salesforce and convinced her to come over to our team? We needed her. We needed to upscale our team. At the time, Jeff Ragavan, Mike, and I, we were doing the best we could. But if we were going to really go for it, and at that point, with $50 million in ARR at that point, we had to go public, right? Because we were getting so big. That
We're
was
on the trajectory.
we were like looking to that was our plan. I thought this would be a good move. I was going back and forth to the West Coast to meet Susan and convince her that she should leave this big company.
It's not easy. I mean,
No.
Salesforce is a fast-growing company. She's a superstar there.
And Mark is incredibly generous with all that he gives every employee.
Mark Benioff.
Yes.
So how did you get Susan to come aboard?
Well, we dated her, it felt like, and which just means we're spending time with her. We're flying out. I remember the dinner in Woodside at that fancy restaurant, and we had a vision, and we needed someone. I mean, we were the fastest at the time, like the fastest growing company to reach 50 million in like annual recurring revenue. It took us 3 years on the back of Facebook. No end of sight. 9 out of the top 10 brands in the world were using us for all of their social marketing to get messages out to all their markets globally. We have offices in Singapore, and we're like, can't keep up, right? And we just told the story the way we saw it and gave her it wasn't about the money, but at that level, it is. Like, so we had to present with like a very generous equity grant. And to her credit, she took the job. And I kept thinking, I don't know why she's doing this, right? Like leaving Salesforce. And she's gone on to do incredible stuff. But I think 3 months later, after we hired her, I then had to have another scary conversation, which was, you're going back to Salesforce because I just spoke to your old boss man and he's going to buy Buddy Media.
So at the time, Google was looking to acquire in the space. Microsoft was looking to acquire in the space.
Yes.
Salesforce, there were a couple of other companies circling, and there were a handful of competitors who were smaller but doing similar kind of work. You guys had a choice, right? You could keep going it alone and probably go public and try to stay on the trajectory, or sell. And you ran a really interesting process. Tell us about the process you ran and why you ultimately sold to Salesforce.
So we ultimately sold because the signs were so clear that it was our time to sell. We had, I've never told this story publicly, but we had a term sheet from Google that was $100 million more than Salesforce. 100 million is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
And it was a lot of money for us, that difference. And we had Yahoo and Microsoft circling. And I had been in San Francisco and I went to Mark's house and I had all the data and I used this mapping tool where I just like circled an area of the map and it put all the people on Facebook into a targeting bucket. And Mark is like me in the sense that like we can't control our like excitement. Like when I get excited, it's like I kind of jump out of my shoes. And Mark's like, oh, like this is so cool. And we basically hashed out the deal. And I knew nothing about the software business, but Mark had written a book that's like, here's our playbook. And I consumed this book, modeled the whole business off of the book. And I had this like massive man crush, which I still do. He's such a great guy. Forget entrepreneur, just he does the right thing. And we got the deal done, and it turned out that if we hadn't done that deal, I think, like I haven't talked about this publicly either, I think we would have had a hard time as a business. And I think it was a tough acquisition for Salesforce because soon after, Facebook made it known that they didn't want anyone between them and their customer. We were the biggest one between them and their customer.
Customer being the advertisers.
Their advertisers were spending at the time, it was early, over $1 billion with Facebook through our platform, right? That's not a great thing for a large platform, right? To seed their ad business. And so the timing was just great.
And also, we had done our due diligence. If you remember back with golf.com, I was not going to let this happen again. So I was doing due diligence. That, by the way, anyone who's done due diligence, congrats. If you get through that process, I was up all night, all day for 3 months, making sure that everything was looked at. And one of the things I also realized about Mark Benioff is he has this huge charitable part of himself and his companies. Like, he believed what we believed. And I thought, this is great. We were struggling to keep up with hiring salespeople. Here's a company that's all about salespeople and the expertise. And there's also the same shared values and morals. So it was great.
So we've got a few minutes left. You all have become, in the post-acquisition, extraordinary investors. For those who are listening to this, Mike's wearing his liquid death cap as we sit here and talk. You mentioned you've invested in over 100 companies, largely tech companies. How do you decide what companies to invest in, and how do you two allocate the responsibilities of assessing that?
So I always look at the team members, right? And I'm going to also do the due diligence, right? So Mike's going to look at, obviously, does the business model make sense? Do they know where they're focusing? And I look at, do they know what they don't know? The biggest thing I can tell you as a founder is you better know what you don't know, and then you better hire around you. Do they know that they need a leadership team that fills in their gaps? Do they have hubris? Are they incredibly arrogant? Are they full of pride? Do they understand they're going to pivot 6 times? What they start with is not going to be what they end with. So I'm looking at that.
Yeah, and so I'm very gut oriented, but I have a framework as well. So I just think that, an entrepreneur who loves to shovel is unstoppable. And is this person going to be able to run through walls and get it done? Because whatever they're doing right now will have to evolve, if not completely pivot. And then it comes down to something that we actually have. We have a framework, which is kind of in the book, Shoveling Shit, a Love Story, which is called the Go Gauge, which is very simple. It's what's the product? Why is it different? Who's the customer? When I say who's the customer, it's not only who, but how many of them are there? How are they going to find out about it? So the sales and marketing. How are you going to deliver it? So it's the whole operations side. And then, do the financials make sense on a napkin? Do they pass the smell test? Those 6 things with, is this the right founder, has gotten us into just great companies like Liquid Death, companies like Scopely, which we were a seed investor that sold for $5 billion in cash, companies like eToro, and originally, we were investors in Facebook and Tumblr and all of these, and so I just think that entrepreneurs have a miserable life, and there's nothing else that they'd rather do. It's the beauty and the struggle, and if you see an entrepreneur, you know it. And we really have tuned into kind of who are the people who are on their path, who have found their purpose like we did. And that's what matters.
As we sit here in March of 2025, if a college student comes up to you and says, what should I be looking at? Forget about what I'm passionate about, market-wise. What should I be looking at? What's your answer right now?
I mean, to me, it's so simple. It's basically large platforms that have aggregated audience, AI, and the no-code development platforms. So check out Lovable, I think .io, but it's just a chat. Build me an app or a website that lets me upload a picture lets you upload a picture of an animal and get a picture sent to the house. And it's it opens it up and it walks you through how to connect it to a database, right? And so all of a sudden we have the democratization of engineering with the largest productivity hack the world has ever seen, AI, and access to consumers that we have never had access to like this, right? And I'm not talking about just Facebook and Instagram and whatever that Twitter X thing is, but also Shopify and Etsy and all these other incredible platforms. And so I just think figure out an idea that should exist, and even a journalism student can build it now.
Shoveling Shit, a Love Story comes out in June, and Kass and Mike. I mean, it's a fantastic read. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you're in business, if you know a young person who's thinking about being in the world, this is the gift to get them for graduation this year. Thank you so much for being here, and more to come.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everyone. To say that I had so much fun talking with Kass and Mike at South by would be a horrible understatement. Their intellect, their ability to see what's coming next, their drive, but also their humanity, it makes them extraordinarily special people. I'm so grateful we had the chance to talk about their journey and to talk about why they wrote Shoveling a Love Story. I devoured it. I think you're going to love it when it comes out, and we're grateful for you being here for this conversation. I'm Jeff Berman. Thank you for listening.